Hi everyone and welcome to your LGBT Inclusion Workshop. Firstly, a massive thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend this. It really does mean a lot that so many clubs were up for taking part, and I hope you gained something from it and I hope you enjoy it. A quick disclaimer before we start, this is a safe place to ask any and all questions, no matter if you think they're silly or that they might be a bit sensitive. This is the place to ask them. At any point, if anything doesn't make sense or you want clarification, please just let me know. And finally, I just want to make you all aware that I don't represent every LGBT+ identity, so I can't talk personally about the experience of a gay man or a transgender woman, because that's not who I am. However, when creating this workshop, I did consult with people from a range of different LGBT+ identities, so I could give you guys as accurate a representation as I can. Okay, I think that's everything. Let's get started. We'll begin by giving you the floor, either in the chat or by turning on your mic. Please share with me any of the LGBT+ identities you know of already. Fourth wall break. So at this point, a number of people shared identities such as gay, lesbian, bi, trans, which was all great. So LGBT+ is typically categorised into minority sexual identities and minority gender identities. So first we'll look at some sexualities. Many of you recognise gay or homosexual as attraction to others of the same gender, and bisexual as attraction to two or more genders. Now pansexual is one that might be new to a few of you. So pansexual people feel attraction regardless of gender and are attracted to all genders. You may be thinking, wait, isn't that bisexuality? Well, no, not exactly. The prefix pan means all, whereas the prefix bi means two. So one could say that bisexuals are attracted to men and women, and pansexuals are attracted to men, women, and non-binary people. In more recent history, the definition of bisexuality has changed from attraction to two genders to attraction to two or more genders. So because of that, there is a bit of overlap between bisexual and pansexual, but it is very much an individual thing, as with all sexualities really. It's how a person individually experiences sexual attraction, so it depends on the person. Another sexuality I wanted to touch on is asexuality. It's not just reserved for plants, humans can be asexual too. So an asexual person does not experience sexual attraction to any person of any gender. I'd argue that asexuality is potentially one of the sexualities that faces the most invalidation from others, and that even includes other members of the LGBT+ community. There are people who will invalidate asexuality and insist that it doesn't exist. And for this reason, so many asexual people will never come out, and that is really sad. Many asexual people still feel romantic attraction to others, whether that's attraction to the opposite gender, which would be heteroromantic, the same, homoromantic, or multiple, bi-romantic, pan-romantic. However, some asexual people don't experience romantic attraction, and they would be called aromantic. Although some asexual people do not have sex, others still choose to, and this does not make them any less valid as an asexual, and there are many reasons why people would choose to have sex outside of feeling sexual attraction to someone. So never base someone's validity as an asexual based on if they have sex or not. Asexuality is not represented in the TV shows or movies we watch, and for asexual people watching sex constantly being promoted to them in the media they consume, it can feel isolating and lonely. So those are 4 sexual identities you're most likely to come across. However, there are many, many more. For some people, having a word that describes how they feel makes them feel validated and is something they strongly identify with. However, other people will feel restricted by having a word to describe their sexuality and may use an umbrella term such as queer, or they might use no word at all. If someone shares with you their sexuality and you're not sure what it means, that's totally cool. Just say something like, "Thank you for sharing this with me. Could you explain a little bit more to me about, demisexuality?" Some people dislike the fact that there are more and more names for the ways people sexually identify, and they are welcome to identify their own sexuality in any way they want. However, that doesn't mean it's okay to invalidate other people's. If you ever hear someone say, "That's not a real sexuality," or "They're just trying to feel special," calmly explain that for some people, having a word that resonates with how they feel means a lot to them, and that we should respect their identity. Now we're going to look at gender. A transgender person is someone whose gender does not correspond with the gender they were assigned at birth. So that could be a man who was assigned female at birth, or a woman who was assigned male at birth. No two transgender people have the same experience of discovering themselves. Some are aware that they are transgender from early childhood, others realise this while they're going through puberty, and for others, they may have lived many adult years as the gender assigned at birth. Another gender identity that comes under LGBT is those who are non-binary. Non-binary people have a gender that does not fall under the binary male or female. A non-binary person can fall anywhere on the gender spectrum, so they may feel slightly masculine, slightly feminine, or completely devoid of gender, sometimes described as being agender. Many non-binary people will use the term non-binary to describe their gender, or lack thereof, whereas others will use another term, such as agender, genderless, genderqueer, among others. And like when we were discussing sexuality, for some people having a word that accurately sums up how they feel is validating and means a lot to them, whereas for others, they will find a label to describe their gender as restricting and may choose to not even use a word at all. Some non-binary people use pronouns other than she or he, most typically because she is feminine and he is masculine, and the non-binary person may not identify with masculine or feminine. Some will use the pronoun they to describe themselves. So in a sentence, this is my friend Alex, they are non-binary and their favourite colour is green. Other non-binary people do use she, her or he, him pronouns. Some because they identify more with one end of the gender spectrum, but other non-binary people will use she, her or he, him pronouns as a safety measure. Unfortunately, in our society, there are still a lot of people who are transphobic. Just by searching up Sam Smith on Twitter, you'll see a barrage of hateful messages invalidating their non-binary identity, making fun of them, and generally just being really, really unpleasant. There are lots of famous people who you may not know have come out as identifying outside of male or female, including Miley Cyrus, Tommy Dolphman, Cara Delevingne, and probably many more we're just not aware of yet. Let's talk about the transition process for transgender and non-binary people. The medical processes that some transgender people go through can be quite a private matter, but I think it's important that we touch on them today, just so you're aware of what your teammates might be going through if you know they're going through a medical transition. I'll start by saying that not every trans person will have a medical transition. There are many reasons for this, including existing medical conditions that would put their life in danger, having an unsupportive family, financial hardships, living in a country where you're not allowed to medically transition or even be out as transgender. And it's really important to acknowledge that someone's validity as a transgender person is not dependent upon a medical transition, but how they feel in themselves. When it comes to transitioning, people can undertake a social transition, a medical transition, and/or both. A social transition refers to when a person begins living socially as the gender they identify with. So they may change their name and their pronouns, begin dressing in a way that reflects their gender, and ask their friends and family to treat them as the gender they identify with. Many transgender people begin with a social transition and then have a medical transition further down the line. In some countries, you're required to socially transition for a period of time before being allowed to undergo a medical transition. But regardless, it's always different for everybody. For example, probably the most famous transgender person in the world, Caitlyn Jenner, didn't socially transition until she had medically transitioned, and for a while after she had come out as a trans woman, she requested that people continue to use her birth name and he/him pronouns. So on the screen we can see some of the ways that transgender people will medically transition, but it is always a very individual thing, and which routes people will take is dependent on many personal factors. They may do one of these things, all of these things, or none of these things. Somebody's medical history, regardless of if they are transgender or not, is often something people like to keep private, and so I would recommend avoiding the topic if you're ever talking with a transgender person, just because it can be an uncomfortable thing for them to talk about. But of course, some people are totally open, and if they come up to you and say, I don't know, hey, I'm 3 months on testosterone tomorrow, of course, react positively and say, that's awesome, I'm really happy for you. I'd always recommend letting them take the lead. If they bring up the topic and are happy to talk about it, then it's cool. There are lots of amazing YouTubers out there who have documented their medical transitions. And two I'd recommend if you want to know more are Jamie Rains, who is a transgender man, and Matilda Hogberg, who is a transgender woman. I'll finish our quick guide to sexualities and genders with the genderbread person diagram. So this diagram is helpful for understanding the difference between a person's biological sex, gender expression, and gender identity. So when it comes to sex, this is not something that can be changed. For example, if you were born with XY chromosomes, which are affiliated with the male sex, this cannot be changed medically. So somebody could be the male sex, but the female gender, because sex is a different thing from gender. There are people who exist outside of the binary sexes, and these people are known as intersex. The assumption often is that this is very rare, but actually intersex is as common as red hair. Intersex basically means that a person's reproductive or sexual anatomy doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of male or female. This can be evident at birth, typically by seeing genitals that are ambiguous, but other times the difference in anatomy is internal and won't be realised until the person goes through puberty or even never at all. Often healthy intersex babies will have surgeries very young to quote-unquote correct their characteristics to match up with one of the two sexes, but there are a lot of human rights and morality questions surrounding this. We could discuss intersex for hours, but we don't have too long today, so I will leave you with the suggestion to watch this video from As Is, which features a number of intersex people sharing their experiences. So going back to the genderbread person, it shows the difference between gender identity and gender expression. So somebody could identify as a woman, that being their gender identity, but be into masculine things and express their gender in a masculine way, so clothing, hairstyle, etc. They may express themselves in a certain way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they identify their gender with that expression. So someone could express their gender in a masculine way, but still be female. Another example I could give regarding gender expression is drag queens. So often a drag queen is a man who identifies as such, however they enjoy performing in drag as a form of gender expression. So for example, on the left we have Katia Zamolodchikova, who out of drag is a man, so his gender identity is male. However, he likes to explore gender expression through the character he created called Katia, so gender expression is very feminine. But just to add that not all drag queens are men. For example, on the right we have Adore Delano, whose gender expression is feminine here, but their gender is non-binary. There are also drag queens who are transgender women, and many of these women have shared that it was through the art of drag and the opportunity for gender expression that they discovered that they were not just a person who expresses their gender in female ways, but also a person who is in fact also a female. So please do keep in mind that there is a difference between somebody's gender expression and gender identity. So you can't necessarily look at somebody and see their gender expression and know from that what their gender identity is.